Rockefeller medicine. Quote, "The crisis in today's healthcare system is deeply rooted in the interwoven history of modern medicine and corporate capitalism. The major groups and forces that shaped the medical system sowed the seeds of the crisis we now face. The medical profession and other medical interest groups each tried to make medicine serve their own narrow economic and social interests. Foundations and other corporate class institutions insisted that medicine serve the needs of their corporate capitalist society. The dialectic of their common efforts and their clashes, and the economic and political forces set in motion by their actions, shaped the system as it grew. Out of this history emerged a medical system that poorly serves society's health needs." End quote. Well, a timely post there. So what is that taken from? Is that a blog post by an outraged American citizen who is realizing that Obamacare is now raising premiums of the average American out there by as much as 539%? Or is this some sort of snapping point that one of the liberal blogs has reached in realizing that they have been duped and that healthcare, Obama style, is not manna from heaven, in which government somehow magically gives people medicine from on high because they care so much about them, but is in fact a fraud from top to bottom that has been designed to further plunder the wealth of the average American? No, actually, as a matter of fact, this is a section, in fact, the introduction to a book that was written in 1979 by E. Richard Brown, published by the University of California Press. That's right, people have been talking for decades and decades and decades now about how America's healthcare system is broken and is certainly not serving the needs of Americans, with the highest medical rates, the highest proportion of salaries, and the highest proportion of GDP being spent on healthcare in America in the entire world. This is obviously a problem of, well, excuse the pun, epidemic proportions. And the question is, how have we arrived at this spot? Well, there are some obvious answers to this, and some not-so-obvious answers. And one of the not-so-obvious answers that is being studiously avoided in the left-right farcical phony debate about Obamacare, which, as always, tries to spin things off into a phony left-right paradigm and a political agenda that doesn't really amount to any difference whatsoever, one thing that is studiously avoided is, well, speeches like this by Senator Max Baucus, who helped pass the Obamacare Act back in 2009, and who was at that time thanking some of the people who made that act possible.
And I want to single out one person. And that one person is sitting next to me. Her name is Liz Fowler. Liz Fowler is my chief health counsel. Liz Fowler has put my team together, the healthcare team. Liz Fowler worked for me many years ago, then left the private sector, and then came back when she realized that she could be there in the creation of healthcare reform, because she wanted to, in a certain sense, that to be her professional lifetime goal. She put together the white paper last November 2008, 87-page document, which became the basis, the foundation, the blueprint from which almost all healthcare measures and all bills, both sides of the aisle, came from. She's an amazing person. She's a lawyer. She's a PhD. She's just so decent. She's always smiling. She's always working. She's always available to help any senator, any staff. And I thank Liz from the bottom of my heart. And in many ways, she typifies, she represents all of the people who've worked so hard to make this bill such an accomplishment.
So what, you're thinking? So who is this Liz Fowler anyway, and why is it so important to be bringing up this, well, gushing and rather embarrassing praise from Senator Baucus on the House floor? Well, it's because Liz Fowler is not just someone who was formerly in private industry, as he tangentially made mention of in that speech, but someone who, well, had a very interesting history, and one that we can even pick up from mainstream sources like NBCnews.com, which had a post back a few years ago, "Fact or Fiction? Senate Chairman has ties to big insurer." Quote, "Elizabeth Fowler, now serving as counsel to Baucus on the Finance Committee, worked as an executive, not a lobbyist, for WellPoint, the largest publicly traded commercial health benefits company from 2006 to 2008. Prior to that, she'd worked for Baucus. Committee spokeswoman Erin Shields called Fowler one of the brightest healthcare minds in the Senate, and she and the Finance Committee staff have been working day and night to reach the goal of reform that lowers costs and ensures quality, affordable healthcare coverage, which is Baucus's priority. Shields added that the only factor that influences his decisions and the decisions of his staff is whether a policy is right for his state and for the American people. According to Senate records, Michelle Easton, former chief health counsel to the Finance Committee under Baucus, is lobbying for WellPoint for her firm, Tarplin, Downs & Young. End quote. This is crony capitalism, aka fascism, aka corporatism, to its core. This is it for all the world to see. This is what it looks like, and this is exactly why healthcare costs in the United States are absolutely out of control and only getting worse as the government comes along to fix it and make it better with the help of their friends in WellPoint and other private health insurance companies. An example of how and when and why and who this plan developed and originated from, we should turn back to that book that we opened today with reading that short passage from the introduction. I mentioned it was by E. Richard Brown. It was published by University of California Press in 1979. But I did not mention the title of that book. Rockefeller Medicine Men, Medicine and Capitalism in America. Oh, that's right, folks. The American healthcare system really does go back to the Rockefeller family.
As the legislatures under Rockefeller's leadership, he set up the American League of Municipalities, which controlled all the small towns in the United States, and the American Association of State Governments, which controlled all the state governments in the United States, including the legislatures. And he used the state legislatures to draft new methods for controlling doctors and hospitals. And so all hospitals and all doctors had to be licensed through state legislature, which sounded wonderful if you didn't know what was going on. That you had to go through John D. Rockefeller to get a medical license and a hospital license.
Wow.
That's what it amounted to. And that's the system we have today. And today we've become the sickest nation in the world and the most expensive medical care in the world, except you never get well.
But, this is a pretty grand claim to be making, that the Rockefellers were absolutely essential in shaping modern American medicine. And this could be cast aside as mere conspiracy theory by those who are not so familiar with the Rockefellers or their influence. And for example, we could cast our minds back to The Last Word on Snake Oil, a video that I produced a couple of years ago, showing that the Rockefellers' roots, ironically enough, really does go back to medicine, aka fake medicine, aka snake oil, as the progenitor of the Rockefeller dynasty, John father, was in fact not only a bigamist and a shuckster, but in fact also someone who literally sold snake oil, attempting to cure people's cancer. And billing himself as a doctor when he was in fact not a doctor. So the Rockefellers' roots and their first attempt at amassing a fortune really does go straight back to the idea of, attempting to cure people's cancer while doing nothing of the sort. That's just an ironic bit of history lesson, and I'll include the link into that video as well, so you can go and watch The Last Word on Snake Oil, which I think is still very relevant today. But again, there may be some who think, oh, Rockefeller, you're just coming up with these crazy conspiracy theories. What do the Rockefellers have to do with medicine anyway?
How did working for a Nobel laureate at the Rockefeller University shape your science career?
So that was a pretty serendipitous event in my life. I knew I wanted to come back to New York City, and I was applying to postdoctoral positions in New York City. And a friend of mine at the time who was in New York City said to me, if you're going to go and do your postdoc there, you should go to the best possible place you can go, and that's the Rockefeller University. And for people who aren't familiar with it, the Rockefeller University is one of the most unique universities you'll ever come across. It doesn't have an undergraduate program. It has a graduate program and an MD, PhD program. It's small. It has no departments. It has no silos. It's unbelievably well funded. It's an amazing intellectual place. And I applied and got an interview in this guy, Paul Greengard's lab. I was interested in the stuff that he was doing. I went on my interview, gave a presentation, went out to dinner with him, and got the offer. And 5 months later, he won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. And I never could have known that that was going to happen when I accepted my position in the lab.
Oh, yes. I mean, that Rockefeller family, yes. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller University, yes. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, the Rockefeller name is associated with medicine, but not the family. I mean, they haven't had anything to do with it since the founding of the Rockefeller Foundation back in the early 20th century, right? Earlier this year, there was a book released via the auspices of Guangxi Normal University Press, published by a Chinese scholar, entitled To Change China, the Rockefeller Foundation's Century-Long Journey in China, which notes that, again, the Rockefeller Foundation was absolutely essential in shaping modern Chinese medicine as well as the American medical system. And just reading from a short article on this, Global Times, it says, quote, "The concept of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, that stood in opposition to Western medicine developed in the late 19th century. Before that, Chinese doctors were open and flexible in their acceptance of Western treatments and ideas, but as Western techniques and theories outstripped Chinese ones and cultural conflicts developed, the idea that traditional Chinese treatments were either outdated or needed to be defended developed, culminating in a division of Chinese medical practitioners into Western and Chinese medicine by the 1920s. In her book To Change China, the Rockefeller Foundation's Century-Long Journey in China, just published in Chinese, Ma Qiuxia, Associate Professor of East Asian Studies at Oberlin College, holds that NGOs, especially the Rockefeller Foundation, contributed to this process. The basis of Western modern philanthropy that had been established, and the West was moving toward modern ideals of evidence-based medicine when the Rockefeller Foundation, endowed by billionaire John D. Rockefeller, entered China in the early 20th century. With the spreading of the missionary movements, Rockefeller became increasingly interested in China. His foundation bought the Union Medical School and renamed it the Peking Union Medical College. The foundation not just wanted to establish a first-class school of medicine in China, it also introduced the U.S. Johns Hopkins medical model to the Peking Union Medical College Hospital and viewed it as a laboratory of their social ideas, which reflects the Foundation's ambition to change China. Words explaining how the modern system of allopathic medicine, as opposed to homeopathic medicine, developed as a result of the Rockefellers and their influence.
The answer to this question may be found in some historic events that took place almost a century ago, when official medicine finally managed to gain the upper hand on the so-called empirical doctors, who cured patients with herbs and natural remedies.
In the 1800s, society sanctioned both approaches to healing. Patients had a choice of using either doctors, called allopaths, or natural healers, called empirics or homeopaths. The two groups waged a bitter philosophical debate. The allopathic doctors called their approach heroic medicine. They believed the physician must aggressively drive disease from the body. They based their practice on what they considered scientific theory. The allopaths used three main techniques. They bled the body to drain out the bad humors. They gave huge doses of toxic minerals like mercury and lead to displace the original disease. They also used surgery, but it was a brutal procedure before anesthesia and infection control. Few patients were willing to have surgery. Most patients feared allopathic methods altogether. Satirists of the day remarked that with allopathic treatment, the patient died of the cure. Surgery became viable with anesthesia and infection control, and doctors advocated expensive, radical operations. These in turn produced the need for a large, lucrative hospital system. Radium fever swept medicine. The price of radium rose 1,000% almost overnight. Another costly technological industry entered the hospital system. The drug industry grew out of the booming patent medicine business. The doctors changed educational standards and licensing regulations to exclude the empirics. Soon, only AMA-approved doctors could legally practice medicine. In a brief 20 years, the AMA came to dominate medical practice. Organized Medicine launched a media campaign to associate the empirics with quacks. The code word for competition was quackery.